This is Matthew, host of the Superhero Ethics Podcast, and I've got an ethical question for you. If I'm trying to help you not listen to ads, is it ethical for me to do an ad to help you do that? If you go to our website, theethicalpanda.com, and just click on the join button, for $5 a month, $55 a year, you get to hear all of our episodes without ads. Was I ethical in doing this? Let me know. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, loyal listeners, we are talking about You. I don't mean you personally, we're talking about the TV show You, but I'm sure that confusion is going to come up a lot because it's a hard show to talk about, but one that we're really excited to dive into, particularly when we look at it through the lens of rom-coms. Now, for those who know the show, or even those who just heard a little bit about it, that it's about a serial killer, they're kind of a little surprised at that description, perhaps. But a lot of what we want to talk about is the way rom-coms and male ideas of romance are often presented, and how this show is actually utilizing those and having a lot of fun poking fun at them with a main character who thinks that they are in a rom-com, and how disastrously wrong that goes. We will be spoiling a lot of it. I have so far only watched season 1, so I'm going to mostly only be talking about that. Riki, my as ever co-host, has seen further seasons. We're not going to get too much into that, but we may draw in some things to illustrate points. Riki has also been reading the book that this is based on, so that will probably add in somewhat. But Riki, let me just start by giving you the chance. You're the one who suggested this show and this topic. Tell me about this show and kind of what made you want to dive into it.
Yes, hello. I have watched all 5 seasons. Mm-hmm. I'm not reading the first book. I went to the library and they only had one copy of, I think it's the latest one, the 4th or 5th. So I've been reading that. And so in our house, when we talk about this show, we like to give it the intonation that the main character Joe does, and we say you.
Yeah.
To clarify, like, hey, do you want to watch You?
Mm-hmm.
And what drew me, I don't even know what drew, like, we started watching it, and I was immediately taken in by what you mentioned, the rom-com-ness of it. It plays into tropes and stereotypes and then just ramps it up to 11 in the serial killerness of it. And I think going in, I didn't know necessarily that he was a serial killer, but he starts off as a stalker pretty much immediately. And then from there, it just escalates and gets worse. And I'm a fan, I'm a fan of rom-coms, and I'm always trying to get you to talk about them or like have more topics on it. So I was like, maybe I can like sneak this in because there's murder.
No, I like it. And we will be talking about a rom-com more generally at some point in the future, especially since Mandy Kaplan, host of the Make Me a Nerd podcast, who's also been on this podcast, and I've been on her podcast, she's a big rom-com fan as well, so I think that'd be a great topic for the three of us. But yeah, this show dove into so many interesting things, and let me just kind of give people a little bit of background on what the show is. So, and again, I'm only going to be talking about season 1 here, but there will be some big spoilers about this. The show starts showing us this main character, Joe, although we later learn that he's had a bunch of different names over time, but he's Joe. He's a bookstore owner, and he seems like the sweet, nice guy who doesn't know how to talk to girls, and he's kind of rehearsing in his head what he wants to say to this pretty girl who's come into his store. And as you said, like, he has this intonation. He says the word you a lot because a lot of this movie is delivered as the voiceover that's happening in his head as he is talking to her in his head. And that's in a sense, like, it took me a while to realize how important that is as a framing device, because in some ways that's what this movie is all, that's what this TV show is all about. It's about the fact that he sees himself as the male protagonist in a rom-com, and he talks about that sometimes. It's like, okay, I know why you're doing this. You're doing this because this is the part of our relationship where we're supposed to have a conflict, and then I win you back, etc. And like, what the show is about how he is constructing a narrative in his mind based on all the rom-coms and all the stuff he's been told about what men are supposed to do and what women are supposed to do, And when things don't fit that narrative, instead of, as we hope is a healthy thing to do, you recognize the truth around you and change your narrative. He instead starts either denying or outright attacking the things that are denying the truth of his narrative. And so he lies to her in order to sort of make her think of himself in a particular way. He is violent towards other people who are kind of getting in the way. She has an ex-boyfriend or kind of like a hookup who she's still not quite over. And he, like, you know, in his mind, she is the virtuous, like, she's waiting for him. But it turns out she has a really nice date with him and then calls this other guy for a booty call. And in his mind, that's not what she would do. So he must have been taking advantage of her. So he protects her and winds up killing this guy. And in the first season, at least, I don't think he is a serial killer. He's he kills multiple people. But serial killer has this idea of, like, you have developed it, you are planning to kill people, you've developed this sort of procedure that you do again and again and again. He's not there yet, although he may well get there by later seasons. But certainly he kills this guy. He winds up killing the love interest's best friend because she's kind of getting in the way of things and she's maybe figuring out some of his plans. He steals her phone, the phone of both his love interest and her best friend at one point, and is reading her text messages, and so using that as a way to better understand her and know how to manipulate her to have the relationship with her wants, as well as, like, to see the problems that are happening. He just, you know, he's as you said, he's a stalker. He's an incredibly unhealthy partner to her, and he winds up kidnapping her and eventually killing her. And, you know, that alone, I think, could make an interesting story. But what I really loved is, and I think you'd help me kind of see this, everything about it is framed as this is what happens when someone has that narrative in their head, and it is so strong that they need to like break everything around them to fit the narrative, because they can't accept that maybe they're not the hero of this story, that maybe they're not the end game for this particular person, etc.
Yeah. So over the course of the season, he becomes a serial killer because the definition is person who murders 3 or more people, with the killings taking place over a significant period of time in separate events. So it's basically, that's to draw a distinction from just like a one incident, you know, these days, like a shooter who kills 3 or more people in one incident. So yeah, like he ends up killing the ex boyfriend, best friend, and then the main character, Beck, or the main girl.
Right.
And in the flashbacks, we get some scenes where he has done this before.
Right. There's an ex of his who, it's not clear whether he actively killed her or he left her for dead after something terrible happened, but certainly once again, she had cheated on him, maybe, and he had once again seen himself as the hero who's driven to do these things. And I think that's another thing that the show does very well, is he never really takes accountability for what he's doing. Instead, he constantly talks about, look what you made me do. You know,
it's always someone else's fault. Yeah.
Right. And it's because she's not playing the role of the female protagonist in the rom-com, and he has to help her. It's never in his mind about being selfish. It's always about, of course, what is best for you is to be in love with me, so I need to help that happen for you.
Yeah. And he's always quote unquote helping.
Right.
And it's really interesting because he's a bookseller and he has a lot of interest in literature, and that's one of the connections that they make. So the opening scene of the show is a meet cute. Just 100%, right? Like it, as you said, there's this internal monologue narration that Joe is giving, and it is already a little sinister, like the things that he says and his intonation. But I would say, like, overall, the scene would still fit in as a meet cute in a normal rom-com. Like he he bumps into her, like recommends a book or whatever, and they talk about, oh, like, I love this author, like blah blah
Right.
blah, and like they connect over literature, right? And I think she ends up writing her phone number on the receipt or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the way that was done. And for me, with that opening monologue, the way he starts it, I felt like it was just a beautiful monologue because it was about someone he's already in a relationship with. And she comes into his store on a regular basis and he's talking as though there's this intimacy between them. And then he just casually mentions, and of course, we haven't officially met yet. And that's when I was like, oh, okay. That's kind of setting it. And I think for me, that kind of set the tone of that what this is all about is about that he is not having a relationship with this person. He's having a relationship with the version of her that he's created in his mind. Talk about that and kind of how you felt about like all the ways in which he's talking not to her directly, but to her in his head and what that was supposed to be saying.
Well, it's the name of the show, You,
Right.
right? Like that is his creation in his mind, and it is
Mm-hmm.
the way like you look for the perfect person, the
Right.
perfect partner. And there's like one in a million, or just like, or maybe just one person, right? Like the whole
Right.
idea of destiny and like the chosen romance and all
Mm-hmm.
that. And that's what this is all playing into, is that he's looking for the one. He's looking for you. And he's projecting all of his own personal
Right.
issues and personal wants. And that's why like there's the whole protection thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think they literally call him, like he either says or like other people call him like a white knight several
Yeah.
times
They use
over
that
the
phrase
course of this
definitely.
show, I think. And it's unsettling,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, because I like this is where we're gonna get personal, is where I grew up on rom-coms in the 80s and 90s. Like that was the peak of
Yeah.
John Hughes, Cameron Crowe stuff
Mm-hmm.
that I have looked back on and said, yeah, these movies, I think they're good movies. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're like well acted, well written, but they're all told from the male perspective
Yeah.
and like male centric, right? About winning the girl.
Right.
And like the women have so little agency in the stories, like they are just the prop for the
Mm-hmm.
men. And that's what this
Give some
show,
examples of the specific movies you're thinking of. Like, I think I have an idea, but just for listeners who may not be as knowledgeable as the 80s and 90s classics that you and I grew up with.
I mean, the one that everyone cites is Say Anything by Cameron
Right.
Crowe, starring John Cusack and Ione Skye.
Mm-hmm.
And they cite it because there's the famous scene where he is holding a boombox, which for you kids out there is a big iPod.
Yeah. Big iPod with big speakers built
Yeah.
into it.
Where he's holding the boombox over his head in the driveway and playing like their song
Right.
that they made love to earlier in the movie. And this is because they have like kind of broken up and are on a break. And
Right.
he's this is the grand gesture to win her back,
Yeah.
right? And it's been spoofed. This show actually, I think in season 3, spoofs
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yep.
But nowadays, like the spoof aspect is someone does it and people immediately point out like you're being ridiculous. Like stop it. You're embarrassing
Right.
me, you're embarrassing yourself. Like that's the thing. Like when you watch the movie, it's like, oh, like it worked. Like the grand gesture worked. And for me, like as a kid, as a young man, that's what got into my head. And
Oh,
that's like how
100%.
people act, like the proposal, the marriage proposals,
Mm-hmm.
the grand gesture proposal, stuff like that. And it's like, no, like that's not how that's not how relationships should be constructed.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand that it really was a huge cultural moment in a way that may be hard to think about. And but to the point of where like if you were making a TV show about a teenage girl set a couple years after that, you probably would put the poster of him holding that boombox up in her room. And like both in TV shows, but also just in our own lives. Like I remember talking to friends of mine in like high school about people we were interested in. and someone saying like, yeah, like I think she's mad at me. I need to figure out my say anything moment. Like that we're quite literally we're talking about like how important a moment it was, and it's become really made fun of, and I think that's probably a good thing. But it really hit hard.
Yeah.
And it's the song also is a part of that. It's "In Your Eyes" by Peter Gabriel, which is a great song. But I think there's a generation of people, myself included, I cannot hear that song without immediately like seeing John Cusack holding that radio above his head,
Yeah.
tape player.
The same way Breakfast Club, like, don't you forget about me. You immediately
Right.
put your fist up in the air.
Yep.
Breakfast Club. Yeah. And so like that is like the grand gesture, right? But there's other rom-com tropes. When Harry Met Sally, I think, is one of the most famous runs.
Yep.
When the Harry character just like has the realization, like, I love her, right? And then runs through the streets of New York to the New Year's Eve party.
Right. And he shows up dripping in the rain and all this.
Yeah,
again,
it
what
has to
shows
be
is,
raining. John
look how
Cusack
much
has
he
had
did.
several movies
Yeah.
where he's in the rain.
Yeah,
And those are the things,
Right.
right? Like where the man has made some kind of gesture and or sacrifice, right? Like the fact that he ran all this way like is meaningful.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think I definitely was the same way. And I can look back at a lot of my failed relationships in my 20s and 30s and teenage years and trace it to that. And I think here's a really important thing that I think the show does well as well. And we'll talk about this later because I think there's some debate on it. But I want to at least be very clear that from me, and I'm sure from you, none of this is about blame. Like, I think it's easy to take this and say, oh, poor Joe, he got raised on all of these, mythologies that men are taught, so therefore none of it's his fault, or none of it's my fault or your fault. And I'm certainly not saying that. I don't think you're saying that at all either. I think, though, that to me, like, it's not a question of blame. It's a question of how do we recognize that often the ways we hurt people are because of things we were taught. And so how do we both, in the same way we can unlearn racism and unlearn, domination or learn any kind of problematic thought patterns, how do we unlearn those ideas about what we were taught is the way different genders are supposed to act in relationships and the what matters. And I think that the show does a really good job of that, of saying like, he is a product of these things, but certainly he's going much further than it, but also that doesn't excuse him. It doesn't let him off the hook. It's just saying like it's important to understand that instead of just saying, oh, some people are just evil.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact thing you just mentioned about racism. In that, in a similar fashion, the TV shows of this era, like 80s and 90s, had a lot of negative depictions of black men,
Right.
and gangs, drug dealers, like that kind of thing. And that adds up and gets in your head, right? And then it's like the whole thing of like, if you're walking down the street at night and you see a black person in a hoodie, like that person is bad, right? That because television shows have primed us for that. And we have to get over that kind of thing. And of course, like in a situation at night, I'm not saying like you should just ignore everything, but be aware and like try to understand, like, is this actually
Right.
an issue? Or is this just like a construct in my head because of my upbringing?
Right. And I think that's so true because that phrase, the construct in my head, is really the whole point of what is going on with Joe. Is that, and it's funny, this is actually something we talked a lot about in my grad school, which was a seminary. It was preparing me to become a pastor. But it was talking a lot about how some of the worst problems in religion, but I think this is true of any kind of ethos, is when you find things that challenge your worldview, and so you have to deny them, or you have to, decide that they're invalid and thus not worth considering in order to not shake your fundamental worldview. And Joe does a version of that. In Joe's worldview, Beck, and part of why like I was earlier not mentioning her name is, first of all, I'll say I watched this a couple weeks ago. We had a couple times we were going to record, but I had technical problems, etc. But more importantly, the show I think doesn't mention her name very often because I think you're right. She is Beck, but the version of her in his head is you. And I have only seen a little bit of season 2 to know that then gets repeated, that it's a different person each season,
Oh
but
yeah,
it's always you.
it's always
Always
you.
this construction in his head. And one thing I really love and also found really hard to watch was how often in season 1 he gets this evidence that she is clearly not the person who he thought he was. She's enjoying booty calls with guys who aren't that great to her. And sometimes she feels bad about it, but sometimes she doesn't. But in his mind, that doesn't fit because she has to be the pure virginal, like Madonna figure who has, been mistreated by other bad guys so that he can be the white knight and come in and rescue her.
Okay, so like in this season, she cheats on him at one point and is lying to him about because he is like in her texts. Like he has a clone of her phone and sees her texts. So he's like piecing it together and like she's cheating on me. And then he follows her. He stalks her. She notices him and is like, "Why are you following me?" Which is one of the funniest things to me. Sidebar about Joe Goldberg is that he's really bad at all of this stuff. And I laugh about it, but like he's bad at the stalking, he's bad at the murder, he's bad at the assault. Like he's just not good at these things, which I think is done to take some of the edge off for us, the audience, to be like, yeah, he's kind of a bumbling fool.
Right.
But he confronts her, and then they like the midpoint of the season, they break up. And it's like, good. This was not a healthy relationship, like in any sense, right? Like forget about him being a serial killer. Like they as like adults were not in a good place to be in a healthy relationship with each other.
Right.
And I think like part of the thing that gets lost is like just because Beck is not a good character or not, I mean a good person, right? Like in the sense of this relationship, it doesn't mean like she deserves anything like that. I've seen a lot of people write about this show be like, oh, well, she cheated on him. It's like, okay, so break up.
I want to talk about this and then kind of segue that into a larger point because it ties into so much of the media we talk about. Because I felt the exact same way. Like, there's that scene. There's also a scene where she kind of is... She's going through a lot of her own stuff where she feels like she's not quite worthy of being loved by him in the way, and she has to do a lot of therapy to like get to that point. And she starts to recognize that she needs to pull back from him. And she does it in a pretty shitty way. And like the show could have made her just the perfect girlfriend, and therefore you make him completely irredeemable. I mean, he is completely irredeemable, but you make him completely unrelatable. But the point is that, yes, she does things that I think would make a lot of people suspicious and kind of curious what's actually on her phone. She does things that would make a lot of people wonder, is she being honest with me about how she, talks to me and she loves me and stuff like that. And I think by doing that and making Joe more relatable, it makes the degree to which he goes off the hook all that much more powerful. Because this is what we talk about all the time, but it's that, to me, if the first step a villain takes is one I would never take, then I don't like that villain very much. But if I would probably take the first step that the villain would take, and the second step I probably would have some concerns about, but I can see where he takes it, and I'm pulled into enough of that it's generally by like the fourth or fifth step that I'm like, oh my God, how did we get this far? I wouldn't have done this, but I saw that person doing it, and I kind of understood where they were doing it. Like that's a great villain because it challenges you. And I think that was, I got cheated on, I got treated badly, and I reacted badly to it. Again, nothing like what Joe did, but I probably acted way too controlling in later relationships and, wanting to know far too much. And I think one of the things that the show, a point that she really makes is a relationship has to be built on trust. And she says, like, I understand if you don't trust me. I haven't earned that trust necessarily, but either you have the trust or you don't. In some level you have to be able to trust. And this idea of like, well, I can prove my trust by showing you my texts or showing you where I am, it's never going to work. And in a lot of ways, Joe probably should have just been able to say, okay, you were not acting in ways I could trust. I need to walk away. But because he has set up this story in his head, and one more of those, say anything kind of moments is that because the woman is the soft, broken little bird, and again, I'm saying this to be very mocking of this trope, not because I believe in the slightest, but one of the things is the emotionally broken woman who doesn't know how to love because she's been treated badly. And if some guy just comes along and has patience and deals with the way she hurts him, that eventually he'll love her. And they just put it right perfectly into that trope and showing like, yeah, no, like she hurt you and that's not cool. And she hurt you because she needs a lot of therapy and she needs to figure her shit out. But that still doesn't make anything what he does okay. Because he can't just, that mentality of she's the broken bird, you're the white knight who saves her is just as sexist as any of the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's going to therapy. He needs therapy. He sees her he sees her therapist under a fake name to gather more intel. So he's not actually going to therapy, unfortunately. And he really needs to, because there are flashbacks that show that unfortunately, like as a child, he suffered from abuse.
Right.
And again, like as you said earlier about the other issues, like it's an explanation, but it's not an excuse for his actions. But it is used to build his character in this way.
Yeah, and he starts seeing the therapist because he thinks that she's sleeping with her therapist, and it turns out he's right. And there's kind of a wonderful moment though where he's seeing, and so he makes up a story about how he's gay and he has a boyfriend. But and this is kind of like this is more comedic than anything else, but I think it also says a lot about where he is. He winds up actually using the guy for therapy a lot, and he's always telling himself, "I'm just going to gather info." But clearly he's really working with stuff that the therapist is telling him. And then when stuff like that doesn't work, he gets mad at the therapist. And so it's just sort of one more fun dynamic that's added on here.
Yeah, he is and he isn't. I don't know. Like the fact that he's not using his real name or like any that he's constructing a fake version of the relationship. I think it makes it hard for me to at least to accept that he's actually getting something out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's possible. That's really possible.
But maybe that's a commentary on therapy, that you tell stories that maybe aren't true. Like it's your version of the story, and his version is just a little more unreliable than normal. Yeah. The therapist, by the way, played by John Stamos, a lovely little minor role in this season.
Yep. Yeah, and he's a really fun character. So the thing about how people see his character and don't see his character, it opens up a whole can of worms that I want to talk about in kind of the second half of this podcast. But let's first just stay a little bit more on this. So say more about what you think this show is saying about rom-coms and the perspective that rom-coms teach us.
Well, I think like the biggest thing to pull it all back is that rom-coms traditionally have been for men. Like we think of it as like this girly thing, right? But rom-coms are for men, like to feel validated, I guess. And I'm not saying like they aren't also for women,
right?
But the way they're written, like historically, like a lot of men were writing these, and so it was about the male perspective of winning the heart of the girl,
right? And I will say here, we're especially talking about the rom-coms of that 80s, 90s, little bit 2000s. I think starting around then, that starts to shift. And the rom-coms of today, I think, are often quite different. And we talked about when Harry Met Sally. That's Nora Ephron wrote a number of rom-coms. But yeah, I'm not sure.
You've Got Mail is delightful.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I would quite go so far as you're going, but I think I would definitely say that like they are definitely putting out a set of gender norms in relationships that validate a lot of things that men want to believe and that reinforce a lot of sexist ideas and stuff like that. In some ways, though, I feel like Joe has obviously learned a lot about these things, but part of his frustration is that she hasn't. Like he keeps expecting her to act as though she is the woman in a rom com, and she just doesn't get that, and that's part of what drives him crazy.
Yeah, well, she's a nuanced, complicated human being. So yeah,
Right.
she's not she's not a character. And of course, like he's complicated as
Mm-hmm.
well, but he's also like in his monologue, he's in denial
Yeah.
about a lot of his own issues. And I
Right.
think that's kind of the key here is that he wants her to fit into this mold, but
Right.
then he's lying to himself about how much he actually fits into it
Mm-hmm.
constantly.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, like the blame, like you made me do this. Look what you made me do. I think is like a line that he says a lot.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. All the way even to saying it to her directly when she, because there's a great scene where she basically figures out that he has been, hiding. He has a copy of her phone and he has a copy of her friend's computer, and like he has been doing all these terrible things, and especially that he was responsible for the death of her best friend, um, and of her ex kind of situationship. And then he winds up having to capture her and like lock her away in this room, which
The
one of the great
cage.
yeah, a great kind of metaphor I think that the show does, that it never really hangs a lampshade on, but is so good. As you mentioned, he runs a bookstore, and the bookstore is it's not like a Barnes and Noble. It's really about kind of like an older used bookstore kind of a place. And he also does book restoration. And so this room where like the temperature and the humidity and everything is perfectly controlled so that he can restore books. And so that the person who taught him was also kind of a parental figure and, as you said, very abusive, had done so beforehand. And that room to me is so symbolic because the whole point of that is to take something and keep it pristine and perfect as it is forever, and not let it change. And that's exactly what he wants. He wants the trophy girlfriend on a shelf who never changes, who never has new thoughts, who never has things that will challenge, but just we're at the rom com, we had our big kiss, we go perfectly off, and nothing else ever changes.
Yeah, you will be happy? Question mark to know that the cage does make appearances in
Shows up
future
again.
seasons. It is a staple,
I'm not surprised.
and they call attention to it in some amazing ways in later seasons.
I like that. So,
Yeah, it is. It's it's a fascinating construction. Like
mm-hmm.
literally, just you mentioned
Yeah,
the bookstore and the just keeping the rare books sealed,
right.
but then the way he uses it to keep the rare woman
Mm-hmm.
sealed is obviously creepy
Yeah,
and takes things to the very extreme in this season, where like that's like the point of no return.
right.
Up to that point, like we're kind of like, oh, like maybe he can keep getting away with this, and then
Right.
he just said like she finds his shoebox of mementos, murder mementos, and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and then it all clicks together for her,
Yeah.
and that also is like one of the interesting aspects. Like when he has her locked in the cage, he makes her write because she's a writer. She's an aspiring writer. That's
Right.
part of it, right? Like that was the connection through literature. And he's like, here's a typewriter. I've taken away all the distractions, taken away
Right.
your phone, your friends. Just write. Just write what's in your heart. And like even here, like he's got her locked in a cage and he thinks that he is her muse, her
Mm-hmm.
inspiration. And it's just like sickening, like
Yeah.
those scenes. And like unfortunately, like he murders her and then posthumously publishes her writing.
Mm-hmm.
Sends the manuscript anonymously, and she gets published. And even then, it's like he's like, look what I did for you.
Yeah. I let you live on in this beautiful, wonderful way. Um,
It's it's chill. Like talking about it, describing it now, it's chilling. Like I have a chill going up my spine right
Yeah.
now because it's like, wow, like they really did that, and he really said that. Like that's
Yeah.
what's going on in his head, is that this was a good thing.
And I do want to take a minute there to just say, I do want to take a minute to say that part of what makes it work, I think the writing is wonderful. I think the direction is wonderful. Penn Bagley is the actor who plays Joe. He was one of the stars of Gossip Girl, a show that I'm a favorite of, but is pretty I think wonderfully trashy, but it's pretty trashy. His
This is also
acting,
trashy.
I think though, this is thinking a lot more about what it's trying to say, in a lot of ways. But yes, also somewhat. But like his acting, it is such a fine line he's trying to walk with that character of that you need to sympathize and you need to kind of like care about this character enough that you're also horrified at what he's doing. Because if you're too disgusted by the character to ever want to get inside his head, the whole thing falls apart. It doesn't work. And it's that he does seem like you can understand where he gets this way, why he goes this way, that I think makes it so chilling and so evil. Because he's not Jeffrey Dahmer. He's not Hannibal Lecter. He's not, either from fiction or nonfiction, a character like that who's just, plotting his next kill. In this season, at least, he never intends to kill any of the people he kills. One of them he does only at the first one. He kidnaps and like hopes he can like change or make him leave or something. He doesn't really know what he's doing, and he does eventually choose to kill him. The other two, he does not plan to kill them. It just eventually, in one case, it turns into a fight, and then as part of the fight, she dies. And then I think in the third case, he does everything he can to stop her from escaping without having to kill her, and does eventually have to kill her. And I'm not justifying that in any way, shape, or form, but it's never I don't think he is setting out to do all of that.
He intends to kill Peach. So Peach Salinger, who's related to J.D. Salinger,
Right.
was a weird detail to add. Peach is Beck's one of her closest friends.
Right.
And he intends to kill her. Like he assaults her in Central Park with a rock.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, like fails to kill her then, and then follows her to her Salinger estate and murders her there.
I think we see that a little bit differently, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that one.
Wait, what do you think he was trying to do when he hit her with a rock?
I think he had a moment and again, this is not justifying anything. I think his intent was to, I don't think in his mind, I don't think he told himself, I'm going out there to kill her. He was going out there to confront her. The confrontation didn't go well. No, I'm sorry. Let me back up 1 second. I think there's a moment when he was trying to kill her. Absolutely. And he's almost immediately horrified by himself and like, oh my God, what did I just do? As you said, again, he totally screws it up. Then when he goes to the estate, though, I don't think he's planning to kill her there. I think he's trying to expose her or to understand what's happening so that he can rescue Beck. And then a situation occurs where she catches him and they start fighting and she gets killed in that fight. But if I remember, she draws a weapon on him. I think she pulls out a gun and then they wind up scuffling over the gun and he winds up shooting her. But again, I've seen it. It was a couple weeks now since I've seen it, so I might be getting the details wrong. But
okay.
Yeah.
We see things very differently then.
That's fair.
Because I don't he's stalking Peach over the course of at least multiple days. Like she's jogging in Central Park and he's like following her multiple times. And then finally when she's like alone in a tunnel, like goes for it. And then again, like the estate, it's like, what reason would he have to sneak into this house? Yeah, I don't know. Let's move on.
Yeah. I may well be wrong there, and I may well be giving him too much credit. Again, it's not about giving him credit. He is still a murderer. He's killing these people. I think it's partially that he hasn't accepted even that himself. But that gets into the kind of larger topic that I wanted to discuss, which is we have talked before about how when a piece of media is being told from the point of view of someone who the writer doesn't necessarily want the audience to root for, but is still telling it from their point of view, that there's really kind of a dangerous line being walked. And that sometimes you can have a movie, and I think Joker is the best example of this, the Joaquin Phoenix version, but there's definitely others. Fight Club gets discussed a lot, where either in the original or just when it gets shifted from a book to a movie or TV show or whatever, the parody of it gets lost. Or like to a large amount of the audience, they don't come out thinking, oh my God, what a brilliant exploration of how crazy someone like Joker is and how wrong he is. Lots of people came out of that movie going, oh my God, Joker was right. And I feel like Joker and I want to act like Joker. And and I think with Fight Club, there's definitely some of that as well. Even something with The Matrix sometimes, or like with Punisher, like a lot of cops think of Punisher as their hero, which is so completely and totally wrong. And as you talked about it, there's a lot of people who watch this and are sympathetic to Joe and think like Beck deserved it and Peach deserved it. Or, Joe made mistakes, but he was just this honorable, loving man. And when I did some digging, one of the things that I saw a lot was either from guys being like, oh, I would have never taken it as bad as Joe, but I get him, or women saying, I could have fixed him. I would have been better to Joe than Beck, and so I would not have he would not have gone that direction. Where do you think this show falls on that sort of scale of like, does it make its point and some people misunderstand it? Does it gotta go too far like a Joker does? If you think that's the way of a Joker, like, how do you kind of look at this movie through that lens? This TV show through that lens?
It's hard to tell when people post stuff, it's hard to tell what's serious and what's like parody.
Right.
But I've seen some of what you've described. The most interesting one for me was I just want someone who will treat me like Joe treats his women, except for the murder.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like that's a big except.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And as we've been talking, there's a lot of stuff pre-murder that is also not good.
Yeah.
Like the stalking and the controlling behavior is not good. Like he doesn't trust the women he's with. Like he installs spyware on their phones, or like just has like clones of their phones, follows them constantly in his baseball cap. That's one of my favorite memes.
Oh God,
in the U community is like, it's a magical baseball cap that makes him invisible.
Clark Kent's glasses, just as powerful.
And like what? Okay, like how are people interpreting this show? Like that's, again, like I said, it's hard to tell if it's serious or not. What I do find heartening is the way Penn Badgley has talked about his character and playing this role. And he has just like unequivocally stated in multiple interviews, like, this guy is scum, like he's the worst of the worst, and it's really hard to play this character because like you have to get into a certain headspace, which he does well, and all credit to him, and credit to him for calling the shit out.
Yeah,
right. I think that's one of the most important things. Is it's a TV show, it's entertainment. And I think it's okay to be entertained by darker themes.
Yeah.
But then when you step away from it, understand, like, this was just for entertainment. Like, it's not real. Shouldn't treat it like it's real.
Right.
And you should acknowledge the dark elements. And I think he does a great job of that. Like, one of the best I've seen for someone who puts himself in these roles, in these situations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really true and a really good way to talk about it. And I think he is one of the executive producers by the end of it, right?
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
Wouldn't surprise me.
And who knows how much that means in terms of actual control. Sometimes there's just you've been on the show for a while, you get that credit. But yeah, I guess kind of where I'm going with all this is I do think that if your goal is to set up an unreliable narrator, to set up a character who you want the audience to judge and not just agree with their perspective, I think that's a great thing for media to do, and I want more media to do that. I just think there's a lot of responsibility that goes along with it. And I don't want to create a thing where I say like Joker was bad and this was good. I have my feelings on Joker and I have my feelings on this. But I just don't think it's quite that easy. But I do think that this does a better job than a lot of other things I've seen of walking that line where it's easy to understand why Joe feels himself to be the hero of the story, but there's still enough there that I think a reasonable person can understand that's not what the show is saying. And there's unreasonable people out there too. I don't think like any show can be judged just by, or any movie by the extremes that it goes to, in terms of the audience reactions it gets and stuff like that. And maybe, I'm sure some listeners are going to write in and say, oh, but then aren't you judging Joker by that? It feels like a difference in terms of the numbers and also in terms of just the general reception to them. But yeah, I don't think it's easy to say this show did it right, this movie or show did it wrong. I just think, to me, if I say Joker, I think is a bad example of how sometimes you can make your villain point of view character too sympathetic and people kind of miss the point, that I think this is a very good example of how to walk that line. And not everyone's going to get it, and that's okay. But that I if people use this as a role model to try to tell stories like that, that seems great to me.
I don't know if I've come around fully, but because I haven't seen the sequel, but based on what my understanding, like I'm coming around on the Joker because of the sequel. I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that the creators basically did like a $200 million hit job on their own original movie and trolled their fan base in a way. Like, that's my understanding. Like, do you feel that way about the sequel?
That's what I've read. I haven't seen it. And, that's a time-honored tradition. We've talked before about how the second Dune book because the first Dune book is very much trying to do the same thing of being like, Paul is the protagonist of this story, but he's not the hero. And the forces that lead him to be a hero, to be the leader, is not actually a good thing. And terrible things are going to happen. And a lot of people didn't get that. And so in the second book, which is more like a novella, it's very clear, like, Paul killed trillions of people throughout the universe. Like, Paul is not a hero. Exclamation point. It's not a great book because it's very direct in some ways. And yeah, I think like, to recognize that your first piece of art didn't have the reaction that you were intending and to try to change that with a second, I think is a good way of dealing with a mess that you've created. And I should probably give that movie a chance at some point. To me, it doesn't change the fact, though, that like the first movie was probably made a mess of some kind. And again, like, how do you judge the movie itself versus how it got reacted? Because so much of how people perceive movies is also these days about the social media response and kind of the memes that get created around it. And so, yeah, I may well be being totally unfair to the creators of Joker. But I think, for me, just watching the movie Joker itself, I found it very uncomfortable because I found like it was pushing too hard to get me to want to root for this character who I saw as a fundamentally problematic and flawed, not flawed like a human being, like, and he is a human being, but like, not a hero who I wanted to root for.
I mean, to me, that sounds like a well-made movie, right? And the cultural impact of that moment goes beyond even just people who say something like the Joker was right. Like, that movie now gets used as a phrase, right? Of like, this is my Joker moment. Of people who I would like say are not even like fans of the movie or like of the character, but people use that in a way where it's like, this is the thing that's going to radicalize me to murder.
Right.
In like a comical, like, people say it in a comical way, like, obviously not I'm actually going to murder, but like, yeah, like, this is the thing that's going to set me off. I think the way maybe a older generation would have said, like, this is the thing that's going to get me to take a gun into a clock tower, right? Like, that's kind of the
I'm
older
gonna go
version.
Postal.
Yeah, exactly. Go postal.
Well, let me ask you this thing, because I think maybe I'm not conveying and I don't want to make it just about that one movie Joker, but maybe I'm not conveying this well. if you watched You, and by the end of it, you weren't sure if the writers wanted you to think Joe was a bad person, or you thought there was a decent chance that the writers wanted you to root for Joe, how would that change how you saw the show?
No, I'm not sure what you mean. Like, I think part of the conceit of this show is that we are rooting for him
Well, but
because he's the protagonist, right? Like,
I, I think what the show does is to make you want to root for Joe and then realize and go back and forth between those two things. But the show does want to show you actually, no, look, here's the ways Joe is bad. Here's the way in which Joe is an unreliable narrator. And I think Joker doesn't do that or doesn't do enough of that. To me, Joker feels like if you could walk away from You and think that the writer was saying, well, if women treated men better, men wouldn't turn into Joe. Then I feel very differently about this show, and that's what I think. I think that's a hard balance to find and a hard balance even to describe. I'm not saying Joker is the worst movie ever made by any means, but I think it and Fight Club and some others don't do as much of a job showing that balance as I would have liked, and I think that's part of why they have the social impact they do. And I think that's a problem to be understood. And I appreciate that if the creators of Joker Part 2 were really kind of aware of that and trying to address that. I haven't seen the movie, so I can't comment.
For me, so I want to clarify. When I say rooting for Joe, it's like, again, like from a standpoint of entertainment,
Right.
when he does something, and again, like often does it badly, like poorly, and still gets away with it. Like, to me, those are my favorite moments of entertainment, where I'm just shouting at my TV going, come on, like, he can't keep getting away with this. He's so bad at this. Like, I say that several times over the course of this show. And that's what keeps me engaged, is like, he does keep getting away with it. Ultimately, I want him to get caught.
Right.
But the way he keeps getting away with it is fun for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And as for like impact and like how people take it, like, I don't know, because it's all subjective. So how you take a piece of media and the lessons you learn from it is a personal thing.
Right.
And so like I'm less of the blaming the creators for like not being clear enough with their message, and more on like trying to understand like why people take it a certain way or don't take it a certain way.
Right.
Because you can like misinterpret any piece of media if you want. Like we've been over this with Star Wars with Andor, right?
And again, I think though that's where I sort of draw the like. And again, it's a very arbitrary thing, but I think that there's some need to say, like, you're right, anything could be misunderstood. But I think it is fair to say some level of how much bad faith is going into these misunderstandings, how much of a truly warped perspective is going into it, or I don't want to make it as simple as like, could a reasonable person come to this misunderstanding? But I'm kind of sort of in that direction of, and maybe it's just, do I misunderstand it or not? Which is obviously a completely ridiculous line to draw, and I don't mean it that way. But I hear where you're coming from, and I think that's very true. I think I'm just not willing. I'll give you an example. I think that when they were making the Hunger Games, I used this example before, but let me kind of fill it in better here. When they were making the Hunger Games movies, the whole point of the Hunger Games is very much about critiquing societal treatment of youth violence and how it's glorified and things like that. And the makers of the movie talked about how they wanted to show the fight scenes in ways that wasn't one more thing glorifying violence. And that the way they defined it is, if kids walked out of that movie wanting to like recreate the cool fight scenes, then they'd failed. And I think that's a good way to approach something, is, to ask yourself, are people going to walk away from this wanting to be like Joe? And I think that's a fair question to assume that the writers are asking. And then, you know, we as people who watch these things, as critics, as audiences, can talk to ourselves. How good of a job did they do answering that question? And for me, I think what I would say is I think you does a very good job of showing us that Joe is understandable and relatable, but never making us feel like, with exceptions, of course, but never making like that is much more understandable that we're still supposed to be critical of Joe, that we're supposed to see Joe as making mistakes in a way that I don't think a movie like The Joker does. And it's incredibly arbitrary. I'm not saying it's black and white by any means, but I'm saying I do think that there's some level of fairness to analyzing that. And I think there's lots of other examples you can say of like, you know, movies that portray horrible racism or horrible misogyny, and the creator will say, no, but I was being critical of that. Well, okay, but no one would know that from what you watched, you know?
I think like any piece of media like this, where it's told almost exclusively from one character's perspective, and in the case of you, like literally in his head, like
Right.
the internal monologue is so central to this character in the books as well. Like they on the show, they've done a great job of translating the monologues in his books, like the voice, like I can hear the voice when I'm
Yeah.
reading. So that, you know, obviously it's reversed, but when you have a character like that and we're in their head, I think it's almost impossible not to get into the character. So like if people are like, yeah, like, I understand Joe, I feel like Joe, like I am Joe, right?
Right.
Like you and I can sit here and be like, well, that's terrible, that's disgusting, but you have to understand, like that's what the show is doing. Like it's putting you in his head, and if he can ignore the bad parts, certainly
Right.
like someone just watching the show can also ignore the bad parts. Like I think, and that's part of the point. That's why I say like you got to take a step back and look at a thing.
Right.
And yeah, ultimately like don't murder, but then like you have to look at the degrees of things that he does.
I-
They're also wrong, and that's like the
yeah.
complex part of the show is like early on in the season when he's stalking her,
Right.
she gets drunk and falls onto the subway tracks, and he saves her life. And it's like, oh, he saved her life, like
Yeah.
literally saved her life. And it's like parentheses because he was stalking her.
Right.
And so it's like, what do you do with that? What do you do with
Right.
that scene and that information, right?
Yeah, and to be clear, he is there and ready to save her life because he was stalking her. His stalking her has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she winds up on those train tracks. So, like, yeah, to me that's a great example because you're right. Like, he was stalking her. That's not okay. If he wasn't stalking her, she's dead. And I think what the show does is a really good job of saying that doesn't justify the stalking, but of course it would in his head. And I guess I think I'm just not explaining this well because it feels like you're arguing against something that I'm not saying. But if I can just try one more time, I'll just say that like what you said about how you have to take a step back, I feel like this show does a good job of encouraging you to take a step back and showing you things that you'll see when you take a step back. And yes, not everyone will do that, but a lot of folks will. And I think that other things, I'm not going to keep mentioning Joker because I don't think it's the only one. I think, as I've mentioned a number of others, don't do as good a job of that. And I think that that's a fair thing to judge, like media that's trying to be inside the head of someone who is a protagonist, but not necessarily a hero.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm not sure. I feel like I feel the opposite in a way. Like I feel like the amount we get into his head and the amount that it's like how close we get to his thoughts and his motivation is what makes it powerful.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree.
So
So I think you are. I'm not sure what you mean about when you say you think the opposite, because everything you just said, I completely agree with.
I don't know anymore. Like
Okay, that's fair.
personally, like I don't feel like we're arguing. Like I'm
Yeah.
just like explaining how I feel about
Hmm.
it.
Okay,
If you
that makes sense.
feel like we're arguing, I don't know. Like
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't feel like a strong difference on this one as I did on the like Joe meant to murder people.
That's fair. That's totally fair. And I may need to rewatch those parts and probably see it differently. Um, I think this is one that will probably come up a bunch as we talk about other things. Especially because I think it is illustrative so much of like what we often talk about as being wrong with how romance can be presented. And this is the more extreme case to be sure, but I think one of the things that I have been doing, and I think we've talked about this sometimes, is I go back and I watch other movies from this time that, as you say, where it's almost in some cases it's not even rom-coms as much as it is action movies or sort of adventure movies where there is a romance, and often that's where I see the worst stuff. And like my personal favorite example is a movie that I probably watched 1,000 times as a kid, is still one of my favorites, but is now a lot harder to watch because I recognize that the main lead isn't a romantic sweet guy, is a complete stalker. Ghostbusters. And I think that movies like Joe are like TV shows like you are really good at sort of being a commentary on those, and so what are I was 6 when I watched that movie and 10 as I kept watching it. So what was it teaching me? It was teaching me that if you just do the grand gesture, if you just show you're so crazy about her that no matter how many times she says no, you're going to keep coming back with a new way to be in her life or something like that, that eventually she'll realize you're super romantic. And that's horrible messaging. But yeah, it was all over those movies and TV shows, and it's I think this does a great job of lifting that up, and it's probably an analysis we're going to use as we talk about a lot more of those stories going forward.
Yeah. Bill Murray is certainly a thing in that era.
Yeah, very
Well,
much
because
so.
like that's the whole premise of, to me, like his best rom-com movie is Groundhog Day.
Mm,
Is that he starts off as that snarky asshole,
right,
and enough of the point of the movie is that he becomes a better person,
right.
and you can argue one way or the other and like whether he deserves to get with Andy McDowell at the end, but
Hmm.
at least like he does go through a growth. So it's like
Right.
you can understand like, okay, like I can accept this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Well, Riki, thank you so much for getting me to watch this show. I really loved it. I really loved our conversation here. And listeners, as always, want to know what you think. All the ways to contact us are in the show notes. You can always just write in to Matthew at theethicalpanda.com. But also all the social media and stuff like that's on our show notes. Please let us know what you think. Please let us know what other stuff you want us to cover in the future. We have spoken.